There are places in the world that do not belong entirely to the reality as we know it. The Appalachian Mountains are one such place. Formed hundreds of millions of years ago, these peaks carry within their roots the petrified silence of an era, before humankind itself. Nestled in North America, they command no respect by height, but by the density of their secrets. Shrouded in thick mists and forests that seem to close in behind anyone bold enough to enter, they are more than a natural backdrop. They are a living entity, a prison of echoes and whispers. Ancient accounts from local inhabitants speak of a hidden presence that haunts the woods, a creature neither man nor beast, but something between worlds, as if born from an age-old nightmare. They call it only the listener. No one knows what it looks like because those who have seen it never returned. Disappearances are commonplace. Familiar voices beckon from the darkness, but answering them is the first step towards never escaping. There are rules to surviving there. Do not walk at night. Do not follow sounds. Do not look back. Yet the question that will not be silenced is, what did those who never returned actually see? In the perpetual darkness that creeps between the ancient trees of the Appalachians, there is something that maps do not show. Neither marked trails nor the most seasoned guides dare follow certain paths. It is as though the forest breathes with its own consciousness, aware of intruders' presence. The winds that rustle through the branches carry not only leaves and pollen, but whispers, names, calls, ancient laments. Those who live on the fringes of these mountains learn from an early age to respect the hush of the woods. It is not uncommon to find cabins with symbols carved into their doors, fashioned from rusty nails and strips of rawhide. Amulets that, according to the elders, confuse eyes that peer into the dark. They say evil dislikes being named. But here, on the coldest moonless nights, it takes form. One step off the true path, and the world around you seems to shift. The ground changes texture, the air grows denser, the forest appears to close in. Alive, sentient, with a singular purpose, to keep you inside. Over the centuries, reports of disappearances have emerged that follow no logical pattern. Entire families have vanished like dust in the wind. Experienced hikers, local guides, curious tourists, hunters, even search and rescue teams have all been swallowed by the Appalachians' shadowy depths. Some who returned were never the same. Their eyes looked hollow, as though part of their soul remained trapped within. They recount fragmented, incoherent tales, as if in trance, voices calling their names, trails that multiply and fold back on themselves, a figure watching from the branches, always distant, always lurking. The creature most feared by locals is known simply as the listener. Oral tradition teaches that this entity lives on the boundary between the world of the living and the dead, feeding on memories, identities, and fear. When someone steps into its territory, it approaches silently, unhurriedly, capturing attention first, and then the soul. The first sign is always sound, a familiar call, like the voice of someone the visitor loves, a mother, a father, a child, a friend, a perfect trap, woven from the deepest affections. Then come the mirrored footsteps. You walk, and someone walks behind you, identical, in time with you, yet no one is there. Locals say that on the stillest nights you can hear this entity murmuring chants in a forgotten tongue, buried long before writing existed. A woman from the village of Letcher in Kentucky claims that, as a child, she followed the voice of her grandmother, who had died years before. The forest seemed to part for her, as if the vegetation itself were alive. She was found 3 days later, curled in a fetal position, her eyes wide and black as burnt coal, unable to speak a single word. She died 3 months afterwards, never having revealed what she had seen. Another incident occurred in 1987 when a group of geology students entered the region on an academic expedition. There were 5 of them. There were 5 of them, One stepped off the main trail to relieve himself and was never seen again. They summoned help. Helicopters and tracking dogs scoured the area. Nothing. No footprints, no trace. 3 days later, one of the students appeared barefoot on the roadside, caked in mud, endlessly repeating, "He called to me with my own voice." There are also reports of ancient structures hidden beneath the forest canopy. Moss-covered stone circles, symbols carved into rock faces, cave entrances exuding a putrid, inexplicable odor. Experts who attempted to investigate these archaeological signs either disappeared or abandoned their studies, claiming mental disturbances. A historian from West Virginia recorded in his diary, found years later in his deserted cabin, that there existed an ancient cult that never died, but merely hid where the world forgot to look. He asserted that the Appalachians' creatures are not merely spirits or animals, but fragments of a reality older than ours, slowly bleeding into our world. The forest, so it seems, protects these entities. It not only conceals them, but also worships them, keeping them nourished. Even the animals in the area, according to some, exhibit odd behavior. Crows circling in spirals for hours on end. Deer gazing at visitors as though they recognize something in them. Howls that resemble wolves, but with an almost human cadence. At night, there are lights. Not torches, but like stars drifting down from the trees, hovering at ground level, flickering, as if lighthouses of an inverted realm. The Appalachians are not merely mountains. They are a living cemetery of untold stories, interrupted lives, echoes of civilizations that may never have been human. And the more one strives to comprehend what truly happens there, the more the forest responds with silence, a thick silence full of watching eyes. Some say the Appalachian Mountains mark a border, not between states but between dimensions, a fold in the fabric of the world where reality loosens and the impossible seeps, drop by drop, into the darkest corners of the forest. As we delve further into its mysteries, the accounts grow ever more unsettling. We are no longer speaking only of creatures or vanishings, but of a kind of spiritual contamination, as though something inhabiting these mountains can touch people's minds and sow within them a nameless dread. Longtime residents speak in horror of a specific spot, never marked on any map, known only as the throat of the dead. They say time does not pass there in the usual fashion. Hours drag by as if the clock itself fears to tick. Many who approach describe an unbearable sense of oppression, as though they were being crushed by an invisible presence. A timber cutter once recounted how, while felling a tree near the throat, he found under its bark a living, pulsating eye staring back at him. He dropped his axe and never returned to those woods. There is also the myth of the imitators, entities said, to replicate perfectly the appearance and voice of any human being. Yet something always betrays the deception, their eyes, cold, motionless like frozen stones. A young man from the Boone region spoke of encountering his sister deep in the forest, despite knowing she was asleep at home. She called his name, smiled, but her eyes were dry and too still. When he backed away, the thing grinned wider and said, "Now you know where to find me." Such stories are not isolated. Internet forums, especially those dedicated to inexplicable experiences, overflow with accounts of people swearing they have heard familiar voices creeping through the trees, seen deceased relatives walking among the undergrowth, or even listened to childhood songs played on invisible instruments. One hiker uploaded an audio clip capturing clearly a 1930s lullaby playing on an old, out-of-tune piano. Though she was dozens of kilometers from any human dwelling, experts attempt to rationalize these phenomena as hallucinations caused by isolation, natural electromagnetic fluctuations, or mere collective hysteria. Yet a pattern eludes logic. These events always occur in the same areas, as if they were nexus points between our world and something far older, more primitive and hostile. One of the best-known cases is the Hazelwood Expedition of 1972. A team of 7 independent filmmakers set out to document the disappearances in the Appalachians. For 2 weeks, they sent back recordings and notes detailing inexplicable phenomena. Human-like footprints with elongate toes, circular impressions in the soil, trees sliced with surgical precision. On the 15th day, contact ceased. A year later, only one of their cameras was found, strapped high in a tree by ropes inexplicably absent from the surrounding area. The final recorded footage ends abruptly with a scream, neither human nor animal, a raw, visceral sound like metal tearing through flesh. The most superstitious inhabitants attribute all this to an ancestral curse cast by peoples who dwelt there long before Europeans arrived. According to a Cherokee legend, a race of shadow beings once lived in those mountains, sealed away in deep caverns after a spiritual war. These entities did not perish, but fell into slumber, awaiting voices, footsteps, human curiosity, and every time someone disappears, it is said that one of these beings has managed to touch our world again, dragging a soul into its restless sleep. On certain nights, when the wind blows just so, one can hear a lament drifting through the woodland, as if the entire forest were breathing pain. Local dogs hide, lights flicker, even the crows fall silent. It is in these moments that the most inexplicable vanishings occur. Victims vanish without a trace of scent or physical track, as though they had been erased, uprooted from reality. Despite the warnings, tourists remain drawn to the myth, some by adrenaline, others by the hope of capturing the supernatural. A well-known YouTuber attempted a solo nocturnal expedition. His final live stream garnered thousands of views. In the footage, he laughs, comments on strange noises, until he suddenly falls silent. His eyes go wide, the camera drops, and for more than 10 minutes the only sound is heavy breathing. Then, nothing. His body was never found. Many locals believe the only protection is never to speak of these things. Speech gives shape, they say. Thus, interviews are avoided, legends are whispered on the wind, and the true names of the entities are never spoken aloud. Some even claim that the stories circulating online are not inventions, but unconscious warnings or attempts to prime our minds for what one day will become impossible to ignore. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect is not what can be seen, heard, or felt. It is the idea that the Appalachians do not simply harbor mysteries, they produce them, as though they were a living, intelligent organism whose purpose is to test the boundaries of the unknown. A kind of rehearsal by the earth itself to convey something greater, more terrible and incomprehensible than anything we have ever known. The Appalachian forest shows no mercy to the curious, not out of malice, but because it sees in them an opportunity, a crack to exploit. As we spiral deeper into the legends, testimonies, and hidden signs, it becomes clear that the mystery here is not mere backdrop, but an active, malleable intelligence that feeds on what humans fear most: oblivion. Disappearances are neither accidents nor coincidences. They are rituals, a continuous act of erasing voices to preserve secrets. One theory among the boldest folklorists is that of inverted memory. It proposes that certain ancient places, like the Appalachians, function as spiritual mirrors. All who enter with a defined identity emerge stripped of it, as though the territory itself absorbs their essence, leaving only a hollow shell, or nothing at all. Hence, the few who return find themselves haunted by fragments, an image that will not fit their memory, a name no longer their own, a voice they hear within their own minds, as if something still clings to them, watching through their eyes. One of the most unsettling accounts involves an abandoned village, allegedly discovered by soldiers in the 1950s during secret training exercises. The settlement, built in colonial style, appeared deserted overnight. Meals laid out on tables, clothes drying on lines, but no living soul in sight. In the central square stood a sculpture crafted from bones and roots, bearing symbols unknown to any language. The soldiers who reported the find were transferred or silenced. One of them, before vanishing, sent a letter to his wife. They did not leave, they simply turned away. Another aspect that makes the Appalachians especially feared is the constant shifting geography perceived by those attempting to map the area. Trails vanish, rivers appear where none existed. Identical trees repeat endlessly, forming an organic labyrinth. A team of cartographers recorded over 20 such changes in less than a month, including a lake that evaporated within a week. Some say the Appalachians possess the ability to fold in on themselves like a recurring dream, forever changing shape to thwart any attempt at control. Mystics and occultists see in these events proof of an archetypal force at work. Some speak of the valley consciousness, an entity not exactly a being, but the collective will of the forest, born from the sum of all its rituals, fears, deaths, and legends. This consciousness, they say, has learned to manipulate human perception, becoming something akin to an ancestral god. Its servants are the echoes, physical manifestations of its desires, like the imitators, the disembodied voices, the eyes in the trees. A diary kept by a hermit, known only as Mother Salome, adds to these tales. She lived alone in a cabin in the Appalachians for over 30 years, sustaining herself on herbs, game, and what the forest provided. Her journal, found after her disappearance, describes encounters with a hooded figure made of shadows, who visited her dreams and taught her to silence the forest's voices. She wrote of doors between tree trunks, stones that sang names, and winds that carried prophecies. In her final entry, she wrote, "Today I stepped through one of those doors. If I do not return, it is because the true world is not this one. It is the other. What unsettles most about the Appalachian Mountains is not what can be explained. It is what remains when all logic fails. The impossible coincidences, the simultaneous disappearances in distant locations, the striking similarities between accounts from people who had never met. And more than that, the shared sense that, upon crossing a certain point in the forest, time and space become fragile concepts, and that at any moment something might stare back. These days, the Appalachians have become a cultural phenomenon. YouTube videos, horror podcasts, online forums, all prescribing rules for survival. Never travel alone, never respond to a familiar voice, never look at what hides behind the trees. These rules did not spring from nowhere. They are modern, codifications of ancient fears, passed down generation to generation, now wrapped in digital language. Yet the danger remains undiminished. The number of recorded disappearances is still alarmingly high, and the authorities rarely offer satisfactory explanations. Official investigations often cite accidental falls, voluntary absences, or animal attacks, but the victims' families know the truth. They see the emptiness where once was a spark in their loved one's eyes. They feel the silence where once was laughter. Some even claim to sense the missing person's presence lingering around the house, as though a fragment of them had come back, but without a body. The Appalachian Mountains stand there still, silent, eternal, unchanging on the surface. But inside, they stir like a dormant monster, opening and closing their eyes in the darkness, waiting for another careless step. And those who enter bring everything they carry, their fears, desires, and doubts. The forest feeds on them. Perhaps, in the end, it need not kill. It simply consumes bit by bit until the visitor becomes part of the soil, the leaves, the mist. Then the cycle begins anew. In face of all that has been revealed, one certainty remains. The Appalachian Mountains are more than a chain of peaks. They are the Earth's living memory, a reliquary of ancient horrors that defy human understanding. There is no definitive explanation for what occurs there, and perhaps that is what frightens us most. For what cannot be understood cannot be controlled, and what cannot be controlled dominates. What did those who never returned see? What lured them into the depths of that cursed forest where natural laws bend and the most familiar voices become traps? Perhaps they glimpsed a truth they should never have known, or perhaps they simply answered a call that only the sensitive can hear. But one thing is certain: they were not merely swallowed by the woods, they were absorbed by it. There is something in the Appalachians that pulses, that communicates in symbols, shadows, and silences. And that something still waits there, poised for more innocent footsteps, more cameras turned on, more human voices daring to shout into the heart of a forest made to whisper.